Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. We are going to wait just a couple of minutes to let more people log on. Appreciate your patience, and we'll be beginning in about 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started now. Welcome again to everybody who has been able to join us this afternoon for this very special webinar that we have been planning for the last couple of weeks. My name is Jackie Butler. I am the Director for U.S. Operations for El Paso Juarez. Our webinar today is on COVID-19 global sourcing and supply chain disruptions, implications for Mexico. For today's webinar, I just wanted to go over a couple of housekeeping items. So we have a lot to cover over the next hour. We're going to try to keep this to exactly an hour long. We do have some time at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. So if you wouldn't mind holding your questions until the end, or you can, you should have an option in your on your screen to type in questions through GoToWebinar. So feel free to refer to that resource if you have any questions, and we'll be sure to address your questions at the end of the presentation. I'd like to just give you a brief overview of El Paso Juarez for those of you who aren't familiar. We are a nonprofit organization in El Paso, Texas, and Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. And I'd like to introduce Cecilia Varela, who is my counterpart in Juarez, who's on the call today as well. We are a representative organization for the medical device manufacturing sector here in our region. We have over 35 medical device manufacturers and a robust supply chain and ecosystem to support the medical device industry. As were most industries, ours has been affected by COVID-19 in a variety of ways over the last several months. And so we've really focused on growth and resilience of our medical device sector as an organization, trying to help the sector continue optimal operations that is critical for combating COVID-19 across the world, but also looking forward and trying to understand how the medical device landscape might be changing over the next year or more as COVID-19 continues to be a challenge, and how our region might be able to increase its ability to respond. And so I welcome all of you to this webinar, and if you have any questions related to the medical device sector in El Paso and Juarez, Cecilia and I welcome your questions, and my contact information is available at the end of the webinar if you would like to learn more. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker for today, John Hyatt. I was introduced to John a couple of months ago as we were planning for an in-person conference for El Paso Juarez, and unfortunately those plans were derailed rather quickly due to pandemic. But thanks to technology, we were able to pull John in to help us cover a very important topic that he's an expert at. He's been working in international supply and sourcing as a consultant for the last 12 years and has been primarily working in Mexico City. So he's very familiar with Mexico, very familiar with the manufacturing industry, is an author and keynote speaker, and we're very lucky to have him talk to us a little bit about what the landscape looks like now, how COVID-19 has impacted supply chain and sourcing, and specifically on medical devices. So John, thank you so much for being with us today, and we look forward to your presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Jackie. It's great to be here. It's always an honor and great to work with you guys. And by the way, the in-person is going to happen. We just don't know when, correct?
Yes, we hope so.
Yeah, it's going to happen. I'm keeping faith. So yeah, it's great to be here. We're going to go over a lot of things in the next hour or so. Hopefully going to give out a lot of useful information to the people out there that have a lot of questions about the overall supply chain in Mexico, and especially with medical devices and how Mexico can fit into people's plans and the overall manufacturing ecosystem in North America. Now I'd like to, with great honor, introduce everyone to a good friend of mine and my business partner from the Mexico sourcing group, Germán Dominguez. To put it quite simply, I refer to Germán as the LeBron James of sourcing in Mexico. Germán, he has just been able to do things that no one else can do in contract manufacturing sourcing in Mexico. Simply put, he's like a magician in many ways. Maybe I'll just start calling him Aladdin or something like that. Germán has 25 plus years experience in supply chain management and purchasing in Mexico. Prior to going out on his own several years ago, he worked as a Latin American purchasing director for several large multinational firms. He understands the overall ecosystem of purchasing and of manufacturing in Mexico. He is an absolute expert at taking projects and companies, specifically American companies who are often our clients or mostly our clients, who are currently manufacturing in Asia, and helping them get away from that turnkey solution in China to implement a manufacturing supply chain solution back in Mexico, closer to home, that works for them and that works well for the Mexican supplier, thus enriching the overall trade relationship between the United States and Mexico, as well as NAFTA, or what we're going to have in about 30 days, the USMCA. So, Jackie, no problem. Anything you need to add, or did I not blow you up enough?
No, that's a wonderful introduction. Thank you.
Okay, so Jackie, do I have the control now?
Yes, you should be able to advance the slides now.
Ah, there we go. Okay. Did I go back? Yeah, there's just a slight delay. Yeah, now it's working. Ah, sorry. I went forward too much. Okay, Jackie, it's not letting me go back. Yeah, it is. Now, here we go. Okay. Now it's working. Sorry. Okay. Okay. I want to start just a little bit of introduction, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty in a few minutes. just an introduction about the overall supply chain and the advantages of manufacturing in Mexico as opposed to other regions, whether you're an American firm or even a European, a Canadian firm. With a lot of things that are going on right now, you of course have the US-China trade war, which has been going on for the better part of 2 years now. That looks like it's not going to be ending anytime soon, regardless of what happens in November in the US election. If you want more info on that, you can talk to me about that later. You also have the COVID-19, which is the primary reason we're here, where firms are just looking for more flexibility in their supply chains and just less overall risk and lead times and all of these different aspects that can complicate a supply chain when you're just over dependent on Asia with these 6-week lead times and having to have extra warehousing costs and all that. And another thing that a lot of people don't talk about as much, but that's huge, is the IP, the intellectual property risk, especially in a country like China, where that risk is very, very much reduced, if not almost to zero in a country like Mexico. Germán, is there anything you'd like to add in regards to these points here, the overall sourcing advantages? I know I'm going to give the mic to you in a few minutes and you're going to get into all of the nitty gritty, but is there anything you'd like to add right now? I think there's a delay.
Right, or just double check.
I was muted. I'm sorry, I was muted.
Yeah,
I was saying that.
Go ahead.
I think the supply chain risk management, it's right now one of the everybody's discussion table. I think it takes on a new meaning right now. I know we've been talking about supply chain risk management for the last 10 years, but I don't think we've ever gone through a scenario like this that has, challenged every single one of our supply chain risk management strategies. And so I think we're going to come out of this with lessons learned. Things like redundant manufacturing, something that we stopped doing many years ago. It's something that is back as part of the supply chain risk management tactics and methodologies. But definitely the tariffs, they continue to be another factor for reshoring. But the risk management, I consider one of the most important right now.
Yeah, especially when, it's like you and I, Germán, we've spoken on this matter with several colleagues, especially with Jeffrey Cartwright, one of our strategic advisor. After COVID-19 ends and USMCA goes into full effect, the conversation that C-suites are going to be having across the United States, that COOs and VPs of procurement and sourcing, CEOs, CIOs, are how we can limit or greatly reduce this risk in our supply chains. There's no question they're going to be kicking this around in boardrooms for the next 24 months after this ends, because they have seen the risk into where this overdependence on China can lead you to where many firms that were in good health prior to this are hurting, and not necessarily because of reduced sales. They're hurting because of this supply chain risk that they didn't really realize that they had. So you're exactly right. And just some other key points on the US-Mexico trade relationship, and talking about these conversations that are going to be going on among CEOs, CIOs, COOs, VPs of procurement and global procurement and sourcing, is these advantages to Mexico. We do have the USMCA that is going to be, it's basically taking NAFTA and injecting it with some steroids. It's going to be better for all three countries. I'm about to post some stuff on LinkedIn about that, how it's going to empower Mexican and Canadian consumers as well as US exporters. It's going to bring NAFTA into the 21st century. We're going to now protect, it's now going to cover e-commerce. It's going to be more environmentally friendly. That's something the Canadians and the Mexicans fought for in negotiation, while the Trump administration fought for more access for US exports into Canada and Mexico. So in my opinion, USMCA is just going to bring us closer together. Regardless of what your politics are, it's just going to strengthen this North American trading bloc. As of recently, many of you may know, the Mexican peso has been devalued because of the crisis. Nothing against Mexico. It's just when there is a crisis, people run and buy dollars all over the emerging markets. That just makes Mexican manufacturing all the more competitive. And you know, as we talked about in regards to what's going on just all over the world with COVID-19 and the risk management that Germán was hitting on, is, you know, the reduced lead times. Everyone's working from the same time zone. People don't have those 14-hour flights and those 3 a.m. calls and all of that. In my last webinar, I was telling everyone that we had a client that a couple of years ago, he said, you know, I'm not watching my daughters grow up. I'm on the phone with Asia until 4 a.m. from 8 p.m. till 4 a.m. I can't even tuck my daughters in bed at night. This is not worth it for me and for my business. I want to get out of this. You know, all of those things are factors that companies have to consider if they're wanting to flip that switch into Mexico, and if they're really wanting to create this more nimble supply chain that we're talking about, and in today's case specifically for the medical industry. Germán, anything before you get into the down and dirty?
Yeah, definitely. You know, the devaluation, we have been advising our client base for years not to get into U.S. supply chain contracts with Mexican suppliers. There's no need to do that. There's no reason to have a U.S. dollar master supply agreement with Mexican suppliers. If you take into consideration that everything that is sourced in Mexico starts with with the idea that it has to be a value-added components of assembly, meaning that it has to have some value, some labor content in order to make it worthwhile to be sourced in Mexico, then there's no need to pay dollars for labor in Mexico. This is where we're seeing this. Most of the companies, especially some of the more mature industries that have been sourcing in Mexico for some time, have already eroded most of the low-hanging fruit. And so when they're trying to find additional cost savings, this is one of the easiest one to have just and to convert just your supply agreements to pesos, Mexican pesos, instead of dollars. I just had these conversations with a multi-billion-dollar client of us just last year, and we advised to change their supply agreements to pesos. They're now enjoying, 20% savings just by doing that. So again, if you only take something out of this, is when sourcing in Mexico or anywhere in Latin America, you should strive to have supply master agreements drafted in Mexican pesos.
Okay. Yeah, and that's something I didn't even think of mentioning today. So you're exactly right, Germán. Thanks. And continuing, I'm going to go over some of the just overall in general, not before we jump into the medical industry. I want to just jump into some industry strengths of, people, because we get inquiries all the time where someone's making this, that, or the other, or importing specifically from China, of course, as we're always talking about now. And, does everything work for Mexico? Not necessarily, but Mexico definitely has its strengths. So just to kind of run over things, obviously I'll start at the end, medical devices. That's why we're here, medical machinery, personal protective equipment, scrubs, wearables, all of that stuff, and we're gonna get into. But also EMS box and build, lots of appliances, dishwashers, blenders, things like that are being manufactured in Mexico. Obviously, one of the things that we mentioned in our book is Mexico's agricultural industry is absolutely key to supplying the United States and Canada's food chain in the wintertime. Especially, I always tell people, if you don't like NAFTA, then just stay out of your produce aisle from about November through May in the United States, and just buy canned foods, that were canned in the United States. fresh fruits and vegetables are now a reality 12 months because of what Mexico supplies the United States, from berries to bell peppers and anything else. HVAC parts and assemblies, furniture is starting to boom in Mexico as well. And, Germán's expertise finally, of course, one of his expertise is automotive parts, where he has significant experience. So these are just the industries, to name a few. This isn't all, but this is kind of the core strengths for Mexican sourcing. And anything, well, we're going to now getting into the medical sourcing overall, the commodity strengths. And now I'm going to turn more things over to Germán. Like we had talked about, non-woven fabric, things such as, obviously everyone's looking for masks, user interfaces, things like that, scrubs. Aluminum die casting is huge throughout Mexico in a myriad of industries, and the medical industry is no exception. Germán, I'll turn it over to you and let you comment on some of the more of these, so I don't hog all of the microphone.
Now, I just wanted to comment a little bit on the different industries where Mexico is a player. You see, it's funny how back in the 1990s, I started my career as a buyer with former Delphi Automotive Systems back in 1996 as a junior buyer. And I remember back in the 1990s, mid-1990s, most of the automotive industry was concentrated in the border region, right? So to think about the automotive industry, especially an OEM to be located in mainland Mexico, like Bajío region, Querétaro, San Luis Potosí, Guanajuato, was, you never thought about that. Yet what we're seeing today is that is where the majority of the automotive industry is located right now. It's no longer in the border cities. Well, what's happening right now? Let's look at other industries. With the medical industry, where is the medical industry manufacturing hub right now today in Mexico? It's located in the Baja region, right? Specifically in Tijuana. So
right.
My forecast is that that region, it's one of the highest labor costs, and I know the medical industry enjoys a little bit of a more relaxed
high profit margin.
Exactly, but eventually, as this type of reshoring continues to come back from overseas, specifically from China to Mexico, I think they're going to have to diversify, and it's going to have to go through the same process that the automotive industry, the aerospace industries have gone through. They all started in certain regions in Mexico, and then they all spread, they all metastasized to different regions. So what we're seeing right now is states like Morelos. I mean, who thinks about Morelos when it comes to medical devices? No one thinks about Morelos, yet that's an emerging region right now for medical devices, right? The central part of Mexico seems to be getting stronger and stronger. Here's a good example. John, you and I talked about the start of the N95 mask manufacturing in Mexico. We forecasted that this was going to be happening in about 3 months. Well, guess what? We just rolled out the first N95 equivalent in Mexico. It's not going to be N95. It's actually going to be called, just like China has their KN95, Mexico has their ATF N95. And that's just, just right off the oven right now. So it took about 3 months to develop that capability in Mexico. And what we're seeing is that there is going to be a lot more innovation going on in the medical industry in Mexico. If we have a plan for supplier development, this is the way to start creating secondary sources, alternate sources, to try to mitigate some of that risk. So when it comes to medical devices, I can bet that in the next 5 to 10 years, we're gonna see the spread of this industry, specifically the device manufacturing industry, start getting more diversified when it comes to different states across Mexico.
Now, Germán, I think you're exactly right. And, one of the key points that we constantly hit on is because, you know, we get a lot of inquiries from Southern California, especially from our strategic partner, Co-Production International, since they're right there on the border with with San Diego and TJ. And, you know, for medical, whether it's medical devices or other not necessarily commodities, but a lot of finished products, you know, people in San Diego and LA in general, you know, that's great for them. And the TJ market does a lot of great service to Southern California. Now, Southern California is one of the most expensive places in the country to live, besides probably Hawaii, San Francisco, and Midtown and parts of Manhattan. The cost of living is outrageously expensive. And Southern California can absorb that higher cost of labor in the TJ Baja region. You know, here where I'm quarantined in North Carolina, we probably could not survive those higher prices if I have an importer here in even in Charlotte or Raleigh, a more expensive place, or even parts of Texas, you know, where Jackie is. You know, you're obviously across the border, you, Ceci, and Germán in Juarez. They're not going to be able to, you know, absorb those higher costs. And so there's absolutely no question, you know, that this manufacturing of medical devices, as the supply chain ecosystem and the manufacturing ecosystem in Mexico develops, yeah, of course it's going to trickle out of Baja California, and also for logistics. I mean, manufacturing in Baja to export to Florida makes really no sense at all.
Exactly. This is what we're seeing this is a good example of the bio Juarez El Paso, right? It's a newly created cluster. And what we're seeing is other industries have multiple clusters in representation in every state in Mexico. For example, the automotive industry pretty much has a cluster in San Luis Potosí, Querétaro, Guanajuato, Chihuahua, Mexico, Toluca, you name it. This is where
look at Volkswagen in Puebla.
Exactly. This is where the medical industry is heading towards, having a representation on every state. This is what we would like to see, because every different regions in Mexico offer different fortes, right? If you do as we're always doing SWOT analysis when it comes to supply-based market and manufacturing capabilities in Mexico, and we always find different regions offer different advantages. Now, when it comes to the medical device manufacturing industries, there is a myriad of different categories or materials that are used and that would be suitable for different regions, from plastics to metals to, you know, PCBAs, to some very advanced manufacturing, 3D printing, stuff like that. We're going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slides, but that is something that we're going to start seeing more of the you know, the creation of additional clusters throughout Mexico for the medical industry.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Germán, and brought and you know, we backtracked a little bit, because you know, when everybody's thinking medical devices right now, they are thinking TJ Baja, and of course a lot of people, I think Jackie would agree, probably don't know in other parts outside of the El Paso region. A lot of people in the States don't know that much about the El Paso Juarez region for medical manufacturing. The El Paso Juarez region is going to continue to grow and boom, but like you said, we're going to see other regions continuing to step up to the plate, and like you said, they're going to serve the medical industry based on their fortes for, you know, how they can do raw material or labor or what other supply chains are in the neighborhood.
Correct. That's correct, John.
Okay, so moving on, it seems like we're making good time here. So the category strengths that we already hit on this a little bit, the cut and sew, the thermoforming, blow molding, plastic injection molding. Do you want to go ahead and dive into this, Germán?
Well, it's when you look at the manufacturing, you know, in purchasing, we used to call them commodities back in the old day. We now call them categories, and they're just basically manufacturing processes. We have representation for most of the manufacturing processes that are used in the assembly or the production of medical device, there is one category that we're missing and that is extensively used in some medical devices, and that would be metal injection molding. So we still don't have metal injection molding capabilities in Mexico. I was actually talking the other day with a client that would like to persuade one of their Indian-based metal injection molders to open an operation in Mexico. That would be the only one. Everything else is we can consider a robust industry. The only one would be also the stainless steel industry, which is an emerging industry. It's still not mature in Mexico. The stainless steel, it's a difficult material to work with, and so historically Mexico has been extremely good at processing carbon steel, but not so good at processing stainless steel. Now this is where the opportunity lies when it comes to supplier development, focusing the supply performance improvement process when it comes to stainless steel components and assemblies. I think that is where the majority opportunities will start developing in the coming years.
Right. You know, we can look at, and like you and I spoke about last week, Herman, we can look at something, and we'll get into stainless steel more, like you said, when we get into supplier development requirements for Mexico as opposed to other countries. You can look at stainless steel for Mexico as a weakness, or you can look at it as an opportunity. Take your pick. You know, people, you know, billionaires all over the world look at weaknesses as opportunities. People like Gates and Buffett and Jobs, they, you know, where there's a weakness, you know, you can exploit and find opportunity, and that's exactly right. It's a burgeoning market that just hasn't really been exploited that much yet. But you know, there are a lot of opportunities.
Definitely.
And so going on and getting into more of the specifics. Okay, so here's just some of the overall product strengths to have everyone take a look at. I'm not going to, you know, read them and bore you. You know, like some professor in college, you know, but, you know, stents, orthopedic braces, even dentures, you know, dental equipment. One of the, you know, dentistry is actually one of the amazing things. You know, I get all my dental work done in Mexico, and all of it comes, some of it comes from the United States, some of it comes from Mexico. It's pretty neat how, like, I've got to get a crown put in when I get back to Mexico City. The crown comes from the United States, but a lot of the other stuff that the dentist does the work with, you know, that comes from Mexico. So that's a very the dental industry in general is a very intimate supply chain between the U.S. and Mexico. Anything about overall with these components, or excuse me, with these product categories, Herman, that you'd like to just mention or add on to?
Well, most of these product lines are right now you know, the manufacturing of this type of products is represented by tier one multinational companies, for example, Jabil, right? And if you look at the history of how the medical device manufacturing industry in Mexico has been evolving, although slowly but steady, you'll find how many of what we used to call EMS, that stands for Electronic Manufacturing Services, that were involved with making only televisions and stuff like that, all right? Consumer products, electronic consumer products are now pivoting into making, you know, medical devices. It's a logical steps, right? A very profitable division in strategy for them. But still, when we're talking about small medium enterprises in Mexico, what we call MPyMEs, we still don't see this device manufacturing represented in the tier 2 or tier 3 supply base. A lot of these products I know are capable of being manufactured by you know, a wide diversity of manufacturers that are already doing similar components in Mexico for the domestic market. The thing is that they're not ready to export right now because of the lack of certain certifications, regulation, or just plain They just don't know how to go about exporting. And so we don't really talk about those, but this is where we're going to find the next, the next level when it comes to developing the medical device manufacturing industry in Mexico.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And Herman, you just led us into the next slide beautifully. And so now we're at the meat and potatoes. The prime rib just hit the table. So since you're from Juarez, you can obviously identify with that, since everybody in northern, for those of you out there that don't know Mexico, everyone in northern Mexico, except on the coast, they love meat, and even on the coast in places like Sonora. So here's the meat and potatoes of all of this, of the supplier development that's required. Like you mentioned, large companies like Jabil, Herman, that are already have shifted from electronics to medical devices. And I used to do work in Jabil's plant in Guadalajara years and years ago as an external consultant. But this is where we're talking about, those companies like Jabil, they're already doing brick and mortar, setting things up, or some of the smaller companies in their category may be setting up shelters or something like that. But we're talking about for the companies that are looking for contract manufacturing, for these companies from these Mexican firms, like you said, that are supplying the domestic market and that have the capabilities, but they just need an extra push. They need some type of coaching to move forward. And this is where I call it the meat and potatoes, because Herman and I talk about this pretty much every time we talk. Because this is where the rubber meets the road in contract manufacturing in Mexico. And so many people, specifically coming from China, those of you who were on my webinar a couple of weeks ago with Denise Martinez and myself from CPI, I was hitting on this, that the ecosystem of sourcing and contract manufacturing in Mexico is completely different than China. Everything is leverageable in China because there are hundreds of suppliers as opposed to maybe 1 to 5 in Mexico for the same commodity. So there's less wiggle room on price. There's just less competition, and it's not a turnkey solution. The supplier in Mexico is going to have to be developed, especially these smaller suppliers. Now, when I say a smaller supplier, we're obviously not talking about some little mom and pop workshop that can put out a couple hundred units a day. We're talking about large factories and industrial regions of Mexico that do excellent work, but they just need an extra injection of something from coaching to be able to put them up to that next level, to where they can be export ready. And we'll get into FDA certifications and things like that. So there's just, and as we mentioned here in the second point, there's so much reliance on Chinese suppliers. You're going to have in China, you can just throw a product at them, send them a FedEx or send them a picture, and they'll manufacture it for you. In Mexico, those suppliers are going to need detailed drawings and product specifications. It's just a different process. And we'll get into a second how the suppliers are going to need to be developed. Herman, for this slide, what do you have to add on?
You basically cover very well everything that that we face day in and day out. But if you look at the medical device industry, big OEMs and ODMs in Mexico, they heavily rely on overseas components to assemble, like
right.
Ventilators and you name it, whatever that device's name is. The Mexican content is not relevant. I mean, it's a one figure number. Now, that doesn't mean that there is not the capability to produce that component that goes into one of these device assemblies. It's just that it's the path of least resistance has always been China, right?
Is always, yeah. Get that component done in China, send it over to Mexico, but now that's not an option. It's becoming less of an option. That that sorry to interrupt, that path of least resistance for those components for tier 1, tier 2, now it's becoming an issue.
Correct. And again, I'm going to be like a broken record talking about supplier development. That's the key right now when it comes to, developing and getting a medical supply base in Mexico, exponentially develop is through supplier development efforts. We've lost that art. I remember back in the 1990s, buyers were supplier developments. They were not just, quoting agents. So this is what, when we talk about the path of least resistance, is very seldom times you need to develop a supplier in China. Actually, because of the vertical integration that exists there, actually they get very much involved with early supplier involvement in new product development for medical devices. This is where Mexico could potentially be an asset to every OEM and ODM in the medical industry. By following early supply involvement in new product development for the medical industry, this is where we're going to be able to leverage additional capabilities from the Mexican supply base.
No, you're absolutely right. Because and that's the key. It's not going to happen overnight like so many people would like to think, but it can happen if the right steps are taken step by step.
Correct.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Let me go back. Okay, and another broken record point that we haven't started talking about today is, the second point here, the supply-based risk. We've already talked about that, and when we started the webinar, of how these C-suites are concerned about this risk. But Germán, one of the things we always tell clients in the beginning, usually through Mexican contract manufacturing, original quotes are going to come back way off for a plethora of reasons. A cost breakdown analysis is absolutely crucial when doing contract manufacturing in Mexico. I'll let you, I can talk about it, or you can talk about it. I'll let you, you're more technical than I am.
No, this is definitely, it's required in Mexico. Should cost analysis, it's one of our tools that we have in order to source, right? But again, it's not used. Sometimes it's not used or a lot of the times it's not required to be used in China. But in Mexico, it's very unlikely that you're going to achieve a target price if you don't follow a should cost analysis prior to sending a request for quote out to the supply market, and then doing a cost breakdown analysis on the return quotations once you get, the RFQ cycle or the bid closing date completed. It is required to understand that, because this is where you're going to roll up your sleeves and sit down with the Mexican supplier and help them achieve the target price that you're looking. If you don't do this, I can assure 90% of the time you're not going to be able to source any of the components. Even a simple plastic injection part would have to go through this in order to extract the most value from the Mexican supply base. And again, all of this, it's a lot of effort. You have to do your homework. You have to know what you're talking about. You have to know beforehand what the cost should be for certain components. And now that you're armed with that knowledge, this is how you negotiate based on fact and data. You're not just guesswork.
Right, and I'm sure some people are gonna ask the question, and then Jackie's gonna ask us the question at the end. Well, why? Well, what are some examples for the cost breakdown analysis? So I'll give you one example right now, and then Germán, you can add on. And this is something that we constantly talk about. Well, a Mexican supplier. We were actually in a meeting with a Mexican supplier about this, 3 or 4, I think in January, with a supplier in Aguascalientes. And their costs were way off of the target price of the client. And I think what it was zinc die casting, Herman. And then, we asked them, where are you buying your, where are you getting your raw material? And they said from such and such company. And Herman and I just looked at each other like, do what? Are you serious? And because we knew he was paying way too much. And we said, no. We said, and then we said, call these guys, and these guys. You're going to be able to get a much more competitive price, because many Mexican suppliers, just on the example of raw material, they're buying raw material from the guy down the street on the corner at a non-competitive rate, which would be the same thing as if I wanted to buy a 6-pack of Coke, that I go to the convenience store and pull 6 Cokes out of the 6 Coca-Colas out of the cooler, and I pay what, $1.79 for each one of them, as opposed to going to the grocery store and paying what, $2.50, $3 for an entire 6-pack of Coke. That's the same concept. And that's just one example of why a cost breakdown analysis, because many of the is so important, because many of these Mexican suppliers that are used to supplying the Mexican domestic market, which is not nearly as competitive as the United States market is, they're just simply not participating in the global procurement of raw materials, and they're going to have to be if they're going to be competitive for export, especially into the US market.
Correct, that's correct.
Okay, did you have anything to add, Herman, with the cost breakdown analysis?
Not really.
Okay. Moving forward, some other things in regards to the supplier development. This is a big thing in the medical industry. Let's talk about, I just want to sit on the first point and harp on this for a few minutes. The FDA certifications, again, we're working with Mexican suppliers and we see this. Yeah, we want to export, but we don't have, and it may not even be in the medical industry, but specifically to the medical industry. And from my experience in the agriculture industry, guess what? You're not getting into the United States unless you have FDA approval. We have Mexican farmers that have come to us, dairy suppliers, and now, with what's going on, well, we really want to get this medical product in the United States, or in this case, like what Herman has been talking about, a tier 1 supplier, or excuse me, a tier 3 supplier that is currently not able to export to the United States or to supply tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers in Mexico because they don't have FDA certifications, which is, like Herman said, causing the tier 1 and tier 2 to run back to China. But they can get certified with the right guidance. They just have to have the know-how and people telling them what to do. In many cases, FDA certification is not rocket science. And with the right certifications, with resins, fabrics, and things, they can be competitive, and they can be ready to supply these larger suppliers within Mexico. Herman?
Yeah, you see, in Mexico, the regulatory body that is in charge of certifying medical devices is called COFEPRIS, right?
Right.
What we're seeing is that some of these tier 2 and even tier 3 suppliers have been approved by COFEPRIS, but they never apply for FDA approval. When it comes to ISO certification 13485, for example, for manufacturing and design of medical devices, we see that mainly in the tier 1. Again, these OEMs, ODMs, that's why we call them tier 1. But we seldom times see tier 2 and tier 3 supply bases, even applying to get the ISO 13485. Now, it's just, I remember back again when ISO 9000 became so popular that it was no longer relevant, right? Because everybody was applying and was getting ISO 9000. And nowadays, ISO 9000 is a given, right? A lot of companies don't require some of their suppliers to be ISO certified, but it's you know, that's the only way that you have to filter, you know, a plethora of potential suppliers by having to having some of the certifications compliance. So what we've have been doing is that we have been what we call sponsoring some of the smaller and medium-sized suppliers, especially in the tier 2 and tier 3 level in the medical industry, for them to pursue and understand the ISO 13485 certifications, for them to have, you know, things like good manufacturing practices implemented. You know, simple things. Even if they don't pursue the certifications, their processes are still compliant. So that gets them closer for them to be able to tap on, you know, the export market, and for the buyers to be able to localize more of the supply base from China to Mexico.
Yeah, exactly right. And a lot of them, they like you said, Herman, in regards to just medical components in general, they've got the capacity. They just don't know where. They're like, we want to export. They're almost like a deer in the headlights. They just don't know where to turn or what to do. And in some cases, it's not an incredibly complicated and tedious process if we can just take them by the hand with a bit of guidance and walk them through the process. You know, they can be on their way in a matter of months. Obviously, it depends on each industry, but sometimes it's, you know, it's just, you know, sitting down with them and say, hey, we're going to do this, 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 and this, and, you know, then we're moving forward.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, and as we're getting closer to finish, and again, you know, the regulatory know-how, hitting back in on the FDA stuff, you know, again, a lot of these firms they're just not sure how to get there. They want to get there. They've got the overall structure. They've got the foundation and the base, which is the hardest thing. They've already kind of built the city, but they just need to know, you know, how can we fine tune things? How can we fine tune things to get there? And, you know, that's where they just need that extra push from someone or a group or a foreign company to help them come in and say, we can help you with this, this, and this. And again, you talked about earlier today the stainless steel, just as an example of an industry specifically pertinent to medical manufacturing. Obviously, medical devices, a lot of them include stainless steel. And again, a lot of people just run back to China. Oh, no, there's not enough stainless steel manufacturing in Mexico. They're not going to be competitive. Well, you can look at that as, you know, you can run back to China with your tail between your legs, or you can take that as an opportunity. And some of these suppliers, again, that have some of the right foundations can seriously be developed.
Definitely. I mean, 6 months from now, the medical device manufacturing industry could be a whole different scenario in Mexico if we do our homework. Again, going back to that N95 manufacturing in Mexico, right? There was nobody doing N95 masks back 3 months ago, or less than 3 months ago. Now that is a reality. It took some organizations, it took some sponsoring, as we have been saying, talking about, and this is what it's going to require. Who is going to be the champion? What companies are going to be championing, are going to be fostering the supply-based development of the medical device industry at the tier 2 and tier 3 level, right? When it comes, for example, when it comes to raw materials, some thermoplastic resins that may need to be certified, right, or be FDA approved or certified, we're still relying on overseas raw material to do that. And even though we have that industry in Mexico, we are producers of thermoplastic resins in Mexico. We're just not seeing any initiatives right now to try to get some of those certifications and regulation, you know, implemented in some of these industries. And again, when it comes to some of these limited industries, such as the stainless steel industries, this is where we our focus has to be. But again, we have to take the initiative, and it's up to the Mexican commodity buyer. It's up to the Mexican buyers to become the champions for the supply-based development. 6 months from now, you can influence the risk management strategies that your company is going to be deploying, in 2021. There's still time to start 2021 with a fresh, medical device supply base in Mexico that is going to give you the competitive advantage just because you took the time and you understand that part of the risk management in order for you to develop your suppliers in Mexico.
Absolutely, but it has to start now. And Mexico is not a country of things. Yeah, it's not a country where things happen fast. That's one of the things that we're constantly telling people in webinars and in keynotes and on consults with clients, that it does take time in Mexico. A lot of it because of culture and things like, a lot of it is culture, a lot of it is the legal system and all of that. But if you start at the right time, things can start to evolve. And like you said, Germán, for 2021, I think if you start now and you're serious about developing suppliers, you can have a lot of success in Mexico.
It is a stretch goal. 6 months is a stretch goal, but it's realistic. It's possible. Again, it's possible to develop a supplier for the medical device industry at the tier 2 or tier 3 level in only 6 months. We've done it in less than that time. So, I know from experience that it's possible. It does require, again, a multifunctional team approach. It's not up to purchasing or to sourcing to do the supply development alone. New product design has to be involved. Project management, marketing, sales, manufacturing has to be involved. And so this is the cross-functional approach is the key to making this happen in a 6-month period.
Right, absolutely. Okay, well, I think we're a perfect time to start Q&A. One thing before some people that probably don't have questions, I just wanted to share my contact info with them. I think most of them are already out there on LinkedIn or have me on LinkedIn.
I can go ahead and advance the slides now since I'm looking at the questions, John. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, if anyone's interested in speaking more and serious about, possible supply chain expansion into Mexico, please feel free to reach out to me by email. That's even my cell phone. You can send me a text message or WhatsApp. I'd love to give you a free 30-minute analysis of of your industry, your commodities, what you're trying to do in Mexico, complimentary, and just see where we can go from there and where Mexico could possibly be a fit for you. And there's Jackie's info as well if you're interested in joining the Bio El Paso Juarez, or because I think some of you out there are not members. They do great work for their members, so please feel free to reach out to Jackie as well. As again, like she said, they're a nonprofit. Their mission is to promote overall manufacturing and greater relationship in the medical industry between in the El Paso Juarez region. Sorry if I missed something about you, Jackie.
No, you got it. Thank you so much for that.
Okay.
We're gonna jump into some of these questions here really quickly, and I have some of my own, and I know that we're right at the 1 hour mark, but hopefully we can get through some of these fairly quickly. So we had a comment.
I'm fine. I don't have to go anywhere.
Okay, great. We had a comment at the top of the presentation asking, what about Querétaro? I don't know if you all have any.
What about Querétaro?
Yeah.
Querétaro.
My comment is that Querétaro, it's obviously not a medical powerhouse, but I think, Germán, you would agree that Querétaro and the whole Bajío region it's part of this of these other regions like Guadalajara, where it's going to spill over into Querétaro, because Querétaro is so advanced. Querétaro and Bajío is so advanced in its overall manufacturing, and culturally things are just more industrial in that region. So I definitely think it's going to be a key player. And Herman, if you wanted to add details that I didn't add, or you could disagree with me.
Here's my 2 cents. I met with the government representatives in Guanajuato, and they're going, Guanajuato, their bread and butter is the automotive industry. And I remember when I met with them, I told them, you need to diversify. You've already done a very good job fostering the automotive industry. It's the strongest industry in Mexico, the Guanajuato automotive industry. I said, some of this diversity, what we're talking about, trying to get the medical industry widespread all over Mexico, it's one of our objectives. And we believe there is some fertile ground in the Bajío region as well. I mean, look at what the Bajío has accomplished with not only the automotive, but the aerospace industry, the appliance industry. Pretty much most of the economic, doers and movers and shakers are located down there. I think the medical industry is going to start taking a whole new level in the Bajío region, and we're going to continue to push for that as well. The Juarez El Paso region, we were just talking to an urology medical device company from China that just is starting operations here in Juarez. They still don't have the phase 1 of the project for reshoring their manufacturing assembly from China to Mexico has to do with final assembly. They're still going to rely on components brought from China. But the Chinese owners, which I know very well, and I've worked with them for many years now, they want to develop the Mexican supply base for their own components and their own devices. So they understand, even the Chinese understand the importance of localizing their supply base where they are manufacturing their own devices. But definitely, to that question, Querétaro, I see all that region, Querétaro, SLP, and Guanajuato. 5 years from now, we're gonna start seeing a lot more movement and activity in the medical industry. And you can quote me on that.
All right, thank you so much. So we have a few questions from Mr. Jose Gerardo. He is, just a plug for him, he is one of the co-chairs for Bio El Paso Juarez's Supply Chain Development Task Force. And so he's very, very familiar and in tune with all of these discussions. So he's asking, first, what about looking for joint venture capitalists in the US to get these Mexican vendors to accelerate their maturity? What do you think of that idea?
John,
we're getting that question a lot now, and actually we're in talks with strategic partners, with one strategic partner of ours, through a strategic partner of ours. Well, he and I are in talks with a venture capitalist firm based out of the United States that specializes in Latin America to get more venture capitalism and to get more liquidity, or to more investment injected, whether it's through just whether it's investment, whether it's shares being taken, to get more investment into Mexican suppliers so they can grow and expand. You will be seeing more from me about that on LinkedIn in the coming months. So I can almost promise you anything like that happens, I'm going to be posting. But yeah, there is going to be more US capital coming into Mexico to expand production, because this is, people are talking about the Mexican economy, and it's going through some problems right now with COVID-19. It's going to hit it worse than it's going to hit the US, which I think is true, simply because Mexico's emerging market. But there are going to be some industries in Mexico that are going to boom because of the economic slowdown. One is probably tourism, because Americans are going to go where they can get more bang for their buck, which is obviously Mexico. But also, and especially with the peso devaluation, But also, there's no question that manufacturing is going to be coming back to Mexico, not only because of COVID-19 and the U.S.-China trade war and USMCA, but because of this peso devaluation and because of the weak Mexican economy, it's going to make Mexican exporters more attractive than exporters from other countries for obvious reasons. You don't have to have a PhD in economics to figure that out. But yes, some are going to need, a lot of them are going to need foreign capital to get things ramped up. And yeah, we are absolutely working on that.
Great. We have another comment from another question from Jose. Are there any organized bureaus that can provide manufacturers with a cost comparison between China and Mexico? Any resources that you know of that could do that?
Germán, that's more a question for you. I don't know if you would send them to COFOSE, but that's kind of what they want us to do for them.
Yeah, you can find different benchmarks that have been performed at the state level mainly. There are some at the federal level, government level, but there is, depending on the product category, you're going to find very different numbers. I would definitely suggest that the first option would be the clusters, right? The medical clusters and the economic development corporations before you try to get any data at the state level, which sometimes is a little bit more complicated. There are a few of them. If you can send an email to John, we can circle back with some of this, sources.
Yeah,
Okay,
but I will add to that, Germán. But going back to what we talked about cost breakdown analysis and supplier development, and all these things, sometimes it can be counterproductive for especially the smaller Mexican suppliers that are just serving the national market. When they see that China price, they run away like a little puppy with their tail between their legs. Oh no, we can never do this. No. And that's why often when we have clients, clients tell us, well, we want you to share our target price or our China FOB China or XWorks China with the moment you sit down with that client, that Mexican supplier. We don't want to waste time with this. We want to see if they can be competitive. And we tell our clients, no. We don't want to show them the China price immediately because they're going to be way off. They're going to get scared away. And I did it because a client insisted earlier this year, and the Mexican supplier disappeared, and we never heard back from them. A lot of times that's just going to be discouraging when in reality, like we talked about today, the Mexican supplier can be competitive. And if they do things right, if they do the cost breakdown analysis correctly and or raw material procurement and all of that. So I mean, yes, we will put you in touch with those or send you a list of names, but we don't want Mexican suppliers to just go looking based on their national market prices that they're charging now and what China is importing to the United States for to see if they're going to be competitive. That's just not an accurate comparison.
No, it has to be on a total cost of ownership, which is not very well understood. But the COVID has shown us the importance of total cost of ownership. The cost of not having personal protection equipment readily available because we rely so heavily on an overseas supply chain is part of the total cost of ownership. And that's a very high cost that we're paying right now. So I guess this is a great example of how total cost of ownership is very relevant when in a decision-making scenario for sourcing.
Right. I feel like we could have a whole different webinar just on total cost of ownership and how.
Yeah. No, there's absolutely no question we can, because like Germán said, most people don't understand it. And we've talked about some of these smaller contract manufacturers in Mexico that are good at what they do in Mexico. but just don't know how to export. But also, most American firms don't know, unless you get to the C-suite and the VPs, they don't understand the total cost of ownership. We're constantly contacted by product managers and sourcing managers who just want to look at price and nothing else, and say, well, what's my landed cost in my warehouse in Des Moines or in Trenton, as opposed to from Mexico, as opposed to China? We say, look, you just can't look at that. It's just it's a larger ball of wax. It's a more comprehensive picture and holistic picture that you have to look at.
Right, and I would argue that the total cost of ownership is also something that investors and governments maybe don't understand and need more awareness of.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well.
Yeah, I have another question on, I think this is for Germán, but you mentioned that it's going to take champions and sponsors in order to get suppliers where they need to be in Mexico. So do you envision that being somebody like a Delphi, if you take the automotive model here in Juarez, who was able to emerge as a leader in the automotive industry and help to develop that supply chain here more regionally? Or would it be a cluster association like us, or would it be consultants such as yourselves? Like who would be the best champion for that here?
It would have to be the user. I think the buyer company would be the natural champion and sponsor for this type of supplier development. And I mean, look at what we're doing right now. We have automotive OEMs like GM, Tesla, doing ventilators, right? Breaking into the medical industry, right? So it doesn't matter what industry. Obviously, the vertically integrated medical device industry. If we're talking about the end user, which is a lot of the time is the hospital, right? And then we have the buyer company of the user, which is the the OEM or the ODM. I think this is where we're going to find that a lot of these champions are going to start emerging. So we are encouraging our colleagues to take that type of leadership role in order to make a difference in their industries, starting 2021.
Right. Great, thanks. I have another question related to China. So one of the discussions that we've been having within BioEPJ is if we were to put together or bring in champions who can help us with supplier development in Mexico, how do we ensure long-term sustainability of that? Because what could help us prevent us from going back to China in 2, 3, 5 years after all of this pandemic stuff has basically calmed down, and China remains competitive? What will keep those sources and supplies here versus going back there?
Okay, I'll start with that. Yeah, I'll start with that. That's a really interesting question, and that's like part of that's like a debate you have. That's almost like, well, let's go to the bar and have a bunch of beers tonight and let's discuss this. Or in our case, a bottle of tequila, I guess, because there's so many things that you can debate around, and this is like saying who's going to win the Super Bowl next year. I don't know who's going to win the Super Bowl next year. I don't know who's going to win the World Cup in 2022. I don't know. And part of this is prognostication. We don't know what's going to happen in geopolitics in the next several years. In October of 2016, pretty much everyone thought that Hillary Clinton was going to be president right now, and everything was going to be business as usual between the US, China as it was, and then, well, that didn't happen. And so, this trade war that has been started by President Trump, whether you agree or disagree with it, no one thought this was going to be the reality. We personally think that no matter what happens in the election in November that tariffs are going to stay between the U.S. and on China. The Biden campaign has said they want to get tough on China in other ways, but they will not say that they will take off the tariffs. When asked, it was in the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago. Is China going to maintain itself as competitive? I mean, I can't answer that either. It's just, Chinese labor is rising, but every time it looks like China is going to become less competitive with other emerging markets for global manufacturing, they tweak something and they stay competitive, whether it's illegally subsidizing an industry or keeping the renminbi down. I don't know. I do know what I will say, going back to the total cost of ownership, is there is going to have to be a commitment from American firms through TCO and just their overall not wanting to get into this mess again that they were in, to want to stay with Mexico and stay closer to home. And what I was talking about, what's going to go on in boardrooms for the next 3 years, is, you know, part of the discussion is we don't know what's going to happen. Yeah, maybe China is going to get cheap, is going to become more competitive because of geopolitical forces in 18 or 24 or 36 months. And we can jump back onto that sweet tooth bandwagon and go over there and buy our cheap stuff. But my hope is that what happens in these boardrooms is, look, this sweet tooth mentality is let's buy cheap right now. Well, that got us into this mess with this perfect storm with COVID-19, with the trade war, and that's why we're where we are. And we don't want to return to that. And we consider Mexico to be our friends and our allies and our neighbors. And we'd rather, even if things are going to be a bit more expensive out of Mexico, we're happier, you know, keeping things closer to home and having less headaches and preventing less headaches, because companies are going to go far into more loss prevention mode after this than just, you know, what can you do for me now? That's at least my hope. But again, I can't tell you. Maybe in 24 months, everyone will run back to China and Herman and I will be applying for unemployment. I don't know.
Herman, did you have anything to add to that?
Herman, you're not an American citizen, so I can't either. So go ahead.
No, I think the dynamics of the market. I don't think. Again, this is a new normal, right? What's going to follow is going to be a new normal in the supply chain reorganization as well. This is what we're going to see now. So the new supply chain normal is, I mean, who talks about global sourcing anymore? You know, global sourcing disappeared when low-cost country sourcing came about. And then after low-cost country came best-cost country, right? And however, here's the thing. Localizations has always been, has survived through global sourcing, low-cost country sourcing, and best-cost country sourcing. But the new normal is going to be that. It's going to be localization. And so we have to adapt. We may not be ready, just like we're not ready to go out there, right, and start reactivating the economy full blown. But the new normal is going to be supply-based localization. How do we do that? We're not ready. So this is where the champions are going to make the difference. This is the new competitive advantage on the new supply chain normal.
Yes, I appreciate that. I had another question, but right. We had an audience question that asks if packaging also needs to be FDA approved. And from my understanding, it does for medical devices. Does anybody have any insight on packaging?
Herman, if you don't, I'll find out for them.
Yeah, it depends. For example, there is some, we were involved the other day in some packaging that was a thermoform packaging that needed to be, you know, assembled or packaged in a clean room environment. It depends on the type of packaging, the material specifications, and the application, obviously.
And the sterilization technique, from what we understand too, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Any other questions? Cecilia, did you have anything you wanted to ask, or any other audience members?
Yes, I would like to ask about all this movement that is been happening about the manufacturing in America, or plants that are looking for options to go back to US. How do you see that happening in balance with what some companies are also looking for Mexico? And do you see? Do you have any comment on that?
John?
Okay, could you repeat? I'm sorry. In regard, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. About, for example, there are companies that maybe are looking for or incentives by the U.S. government to go back to U.S. and start to manufacturing again in local in U.S. But we have also these kind of movements about that go back to some place close, that will be in this case Mexico. Do you see any reaction of the market in order to go back, if it's better for them to go back to US or come to Mexico?
I'm not exactly sure. Yeah, I know what you're saying, and I know the Trump administration is trying to incentivize American firms, specifically in medical device and steel and other manufacturing that they consider to be a national security or public health of national security or public health concern. Yeah, to bring it back to the United States. And you're also seeing that in other countries, like Japan's prime minister now is offering subsidies to Japanese companies to pull manufacturing out of China and back to Japan. So in the Mexican case, I don't know if there is an actual movement from the U.S. government to say, well, you know, Canada or Mexico, you know, why don't you just move it back there as opposed to back to the plant in Wisconsin? I don't know that. What I can say is that in general, the whole premise behind NAFTA and now USMCA is for us to depend on each other more than we depend on other countries outside of this hemisphere. So my guess would be that it's going to be met much more favorably by the U.S. government in general if a new manufacturing operation gets parked in Juarez as opposed to Shanghai for medical device manufacturing. Now, is that going to be subsidized by the U.S. government? I would seriously doubt it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think that will wrap up the Q&A session, unless anybody has any final comments.
Any other that, you know, you have Jackie and my email, you feel free to reach out to us.
Yes, and I'd like to thank John and Germán once again for joining us today and providing so much insight into global supply chain challenges and also opportunities for Mexico. Thank you all for joining us today. If you have any follow-up questions, you have our contact information. Feel free to reach out, and we will hopefully be following up in the next several months with continued conversations on this topic. So stay tuned.
Absolutely. Look forward to participating. Thank you so much, Jackie and Ceci.
Thank you both very much. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Be safe and be well. Thank you.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.